Okay, today we have to start chapter 4, which is about money and inflation. So in this chapter, you will learn the classical theory of inflation. We will discuss about the causes of inflation, effects of inflation, and the social cost of inflation. And because our model is classical model, so we will assume that prices are flexible. Okay. And market clears whenever there is disequilibrium in the market, so prices will adjust to bring equilibrium. Okay, so prices are flexible, so there would be a price adjustment to bring equilibrium in the market. And we are discussing about long run, so this classical theory of inflation is about the long run, because all classical theories are about long run. And then we have to discuss about the connection between money and price. Okay, inflation rate we measure as the percentage increase in the average level of prices. Okay, so if we take the growth rate of price, okay, our percentage increase in price, that would be inflation rate. And price is the amount of money which is required to buy goods and get services. And because prices are defined in terms of money, so we need to consider the nature of money and what is money supply and how money supply is determined and how money supply is controlled and who will control the money supply. This we have to discuss. Okay. So money is the stock of asset that can be readily used to make transactions. Okay, we have different asset. We have just like we have land is asset, we have share, there are assets, we have bond is asset. So all these are assets, and money is the most liquid asset. And because we can make transaction with money, and the functions of money, it's a medium of exchange. We use it to buy goods and services. So this is the main function of money, because money is generally accepted as a medium of exchange. Okay. Then money is also a store of value. We transfer purchasing power from present to future. Okay. When we store the value, so this means we are transferring purchasing power from present to future. Then money can also be used as unit of account. So it is a common unit by which everyone measures the price and value. So these are the main functions of money. Now, before money, there was barter system, and in barter system there was direct exchange of goods and services. Okay, so if you have a good, then you can exchange that good with some other good or with some other service. But there were some problems with the barter system. Okay, so the first problem was, in a barter system there was a need for double coincidence of want. Okay, so this was the difficulty with the barter system, that if you want to exchange something with some other goods, then you have to find out a person who has that good, and that person should be ready to accept your good. Okay, so that was the main problem with the barter system. Okay, so there was a need for a double coincidence of want. So if I have, suppose, rice and I need wheat, so I have to find a person who need rice, and that person has wheat, and then we can exchange rice with wheat. Then also there was a problem with the store of value in a barter system. So if we store value, there might be some, damage with that store of value. So that was a fear. And then also unit of account, uh, indivisibility of certain items. Okay, so how to divide certain items. So indivisibility was also issue. So, but then we introduce money in the economy, and money solve all these problems, most of these problems. So, money is a medium of exchange which is generally acceptable, okay, and it is also a store of value, unit of account. Then we have different types of money. We have fiat money. Uh, it has no intrinsic value. Okay, so the example is paper currency that we use. So as a commodity, there is no value for that paper. Okay, that we are using 1,000 rupees note and 500 rupees note, 100 rupees note. As a paper, it has no value, but as a currency, it has value. Okay, so then we also had commodity money. In the past, we were using commodity money, which has intrinsic value. Examples were gold coin. We use gold coin. We use silver coins. We use other uh, goods as money. But there was some problem with such commodity money because sometime it happened that the value of commodity has increased. So the money that we were using, that the commodity that we were using as money, sometime there was a problem. So if you have defined that this gold coin has this much value, but if gold become expensive, then people will not use that coin as money. They will use it as a commodity. So that was the problem. That's why fiat money is used, because as a commodity it has no value. Then supply of money. Uh, So money supply is the quantity of money which is available in the economy, and monetary policy is the control over the money supply. And really the central bank will control the supply of money in the economy. Okay. In our case, the State Bank of Pakistan supply and control the money. Okay. and, and the monetary policy is conducted by the central bank of the country. Okay. Then we have different measures for the supply of money. We have, currency. Okay. We have M1. These are different definitions of money. So in M1 we have currency, we have demand deposit, we have travelers checks and other checkable deposits. Then we have M2, which is M1 plus small time deposits and saving deposit, and money market, mutual funds, and money market deposit accounts. Then we have some other definitions of money. We have M3, also we have M4. Okay. Then this is the classical theory of the quantity theory of money. Okay. Now this is a simple theory linking the inflation rate to the growth rate of money supply. Now, and this begin with the concept of velocity. Velocity means the number of times money changes hand. Okay, so the rate at which money circulate. Okay, so number of times money changes and is the velocity. Okay, the number of times the average dollar bill changes hands in a given time period. Now suppose in 2007 we have $500 billion transactions. Okay, and money supply was $100 billion. So transaction value is $500 billion and money supply is $100 billion. So this means the average dollar is used in 5 transactions in 2007. So this means if we want to calculate
Excuse me,
velocity,
sir.
yes,
Someone is waiting.
okay, let them wait. So the average dollar which is used in transaction is 5. Okay, so velocity is 5. So how we got velocity? We divided the transaction with the money supply. Okay, this transaction value with the money supply, then we got velocity. Okay, so $500 divided by $100, we will get 5. Okay, and it has no unit. Okay, so 5 times the average dollar which was used. So if we now define velocity, it will be transaction divided by money supply. Okay, so this means if we want to get velocity, which is V, which equals value of all transactions and divided by uh, money supply. Now, how to get transaction? Money supply is determined by the central bank. Okay, then the question is how to get the value of transaction. Okay, so GDP, nominal GDP, is used as a proxy for total transactions. Okay, now and we learn in chapter 3 how to get nominal GDP. If we multiply the price with the real money, okay, real output, then we will get the nominal GDP. Okay, so then this means price, and price of output is GDP deflator, is general price level. This is Y is the quantity of output, which is the real GDP. Okay, and if we multiply this price with the value quantity of output, then we will get the value of output. Okay, which is the nominal GDP. So this we can get and money supply, and then we can get the velocity. So if you have all these three, price level and quantity of output, real GDP, price level, proxy is GDP deflator, okay, or if you have suppose nominal GDP and money supply, you can simply divide nominal GDP with the money supply, then you will get velocity. Or if you have real GDP and GDP deflator, then again you can get velocity if you multiply these two. Okay, um, GDP deflator with the real GDP and divided by money supply, you will get the velocity. Then we have to get quantity equation. So from here, because V equals to P into Y divided by M, so I will take M to the left hand side. So I have MV equals to P into Y. And this we got from the previous definition of velocity. And this is an identity, and it holds by definition of the variables. So left hand side always equals to right hand side, because this is an identity. Now money demand, how to get money demand or real money balances. So this is money supply divided by price level. So this will get the real money supply, okay, or real money balances. Okay, and money demand is a function of output. Okay, is some proportion of output, and this K is how much money people wish to hold for each dollar of income. Okay, and this K is exogenous. Okay. We demand for money because we want to make transactions. Okay. Now there are different reasons for demanding money. Uh, we want to make transactions. That's why we demand for money. So there is a transaction demand for money, and also uh, there is a precautionary demand for money. Okay, we want to hold money because we want to meet emergencies. That is precautionary demand for money. So every day you are going to your office, you are not going for any shopping, but still you keep some money with your pocket. Why? Because you want to meet emergencies. Okay, that money that you are keeping with your pocket is not because of making any transaction. Okay, you don't want to make any shopping, but you are keeping that money simply because you want to meet emergency, and that is the precautionary demand for money. So we demand for money not only for transaction purposes, but we also demand for money for precautionary purposes. Okay, and there is also a speculative demand for money, and that depends on the interest rate. Okay, so here we are just considering the transaction demand for money. Okay, it depends on the output. So if it means output produce increases, we will demand more money because we want to make more transaction if more output is available. So money demand is equals to K into Y. Y is the output, okay, and this is the quantity equation, MV equals to PY, okay. Now the connection from here, if I bring this P here, M divided by P, and this would be 1 over V, okay. This P comes to the left hand side, then I have M divided by P, which is same as M divided by P here, but this V right hand side will become 1 over V. So Y is here, so this K equals 1 over V. Okay. So this means K equals 1 over V. So when people hold lot of money related to their income, this means K is high. So money changes hand infrequently. So velocity would be low. Okay. So when K is low, V would be high. K is high, V would be low. So this is the reciprocal, no? So V is the reciprocal of K, or K is the reciprocal of velocity. Now if we go back to the quantity equation, so we have to assume that V is constant and exogenous. Okay, so that's why V equals V bar. And with this assumption, now the quantity equation becomes MV, which is V is now constant or exogenous. So then equals to P into Y. Then how the price level is determined, and this is the real GDP, real output. Okay, now V is constant, and so money supply determines the nominal GDP. So price multiplied by real GDP, okay, price level or GDP deflator. So this means the money supply determines nominal GDP, which is the product of GDP deflator and real GDP. And this real GDP Y is determined by economy's supply of capital and labor. Okay, and the production function, if you remember that we discussed in chapter 3. So real output is determined by the factors of production, is capital and labor. So if there is a change in capital or change in labor, then output will change. Real GDP will change. So Price level is nominal GDP divided by real GDP, which is the GDP deflator. GDP deflator is the price level, which is the ratio of nominal GDP and real GDP. Now from chapter 2, we know that the growth rate of a product equals the sum of the growth rate. Okay, so MB, so if we take the growth rate, it will be delta M over M is the growth rate of money supply. This is delta V over V, growth rate of velocity. Delta P over P, this is the growth rate of price. And delta Y over Y is the growth rate of real output. Okay, because we have the product, and from chapter 2, if you remember the arithmetic trick, so growth rate of the product equals to sum of the growth rate. So here also, this was the product, it was P into Y. Now if you are taking growth rate, then it will become growth rate of price plus growth rate of real GDP. Now the quantity theory of money assumes that velocity is constant. So if velocity is constant, so this means delta V will be 0. And 0 divided by anything is 0. So this equals to 0. So this equals to 0. Okay. Now we are assuming that this pi is the growth rate of price. And if you remember in the beginning, we discussed that the growth rate of price is the inflation rate. Okay. So this is basically the inflation rate. Now we remove this part because this is 0. So we are left with this delta M over M, delta P over P, delta Y over Y. So we have this part. Okay. From here, because delta P over P, we assume that this is inflation rate. Okay, so inflation rate equals, this is the growth rate of money supply and this is the growth rate of real output. Okay, so this means inflation rate in the economy is the difference between the growth rate of money supply and the growth rate of real output. Now it is very important to understand this. So this means if in the economy the growth rate of money supply equals the growth rate of real GDP, because Y is real GDP, then there is no inflation. Inflation rate would be 0. If the real GDP growth rate is 5%, money supply growth rate is also 5%, so inflation rate would be 0. But when we have inflation if the growth rate of money supply is greater than growth rate of real GDP. Now, if growth rate of real GDP is 5% and growth rate of money supply is 15%, so this means 15 minus 5, inflation rate would be 10%. So if this means if we want to keep inflation rate low, we have to control the money supply. Okay, and we have to look at what is the growth rate of real output. Keeping in view that we have to set the growth rate of money supply. Now, if the growth rate of money supply is less than the growth rate of real output, then inflation rate would be negative. Okay. In our case, in case of Pakistan, we have a positive inflation rate and it was more than 10%, okay, in some year. So this means in those years, our growth rate of money supply was more than the growth rate of real output. So normal economic growth requires a certain amount of money supply growth to facilitate the growth in transaction. Okay. So central bank, observe this growth rate of real output, and then they set the growth rate of money supply. But sometime, government forces the central bank to print more money to increase the money supply growth rate. So in that case, there would be inflation. Okay. So money growth in excess of this amount leads to inflation, as I discussed just now, that if your money supply growth rate is more than the growth rate of real output, then there will be inflation. It leads to inflation. Now, delta Y over Y depends on growth in the factors of production and the technological progress. This growth rate of real output, this depends on how your capital is growing, how the labor force is growing. Okay. Now, because we are taking this output as given, okay. So if we assume that labor supply is fixed, labor capital stock is fixed, and there is no change in technological progress, so there will be no change in real output. Then we have one-to-one relationship between inflation rate and the money supply. So this quantity theory of money predict one-for-one relationship between changes in money growth rate and changes in inflation rate. So in the long run, because output is at full employment equilibrium level according to classical theory, so then there exists a direct and proportional relationship between money supply and inflation rate in the economy. So we have direct relationship, okay, between money supply growth rate and inflation rate in the economy. So this quantity theory of money says that if we increase, suppose money supply growth rate by 5%, so in the long run there will be a 5% increase in inflation rate. Okay, so there is one-to-one relationship. Now, if we look at the real world data, okay, then we see that countries with higher money growth rate, they should have higher inflation rate. And if you have lower money supply growth rate, then you have lower inflation rate. And the long run trend behavior of a country's inflation should be similar to the long run trend in the country's money growth rate. Okay. This is the data. Okay. So we have money supply here. So we have money supply growth rate. We have inflation rate. And this is the scatter plot. Now we can see that for Singapore, the money supply growth rate is low, then inflation rate is also low. Okay. And for these countries, Turkey, for Indonesia, like this, so they have high money supply growth rate and then they have high inflation rate. Okay, and so this means higher is the money supply growth rate, higher would be the inflation rate, and lower is the money supply growth rate, lower would be inflation rate. So this means if we want to control inflation rate, we have to control the money supply growth rate. Or we have to increase the real output, okay, growth rate. Then this is rich, okay, to spend money without raising taxes or selling bonds. The government can print money, okay, and the revenue which is raised from printing money is called rich, okay. And basically, when government decide for their budget, they have their expenditures, they have their revenue, okay, tax revenue. Now, if their expenditures are more than their tax revenue, So then their budget is in deficit. So once your budget is in deficit, then you have to finance that deficit. So then central government asks central bank to print money. Okay, and this is basically inflation tax, because if you are printing more money, you are bringing inflation in the economy. And if people are not paying taxes, then government go for this option, CNRH. They raise no, money, revenue through printing money. Now, if you are not paying taxes, so this means government will print money, and then government will buy goods and services with that printed money. Now, less goods and services would be available in the economy, and now when people rush to the market to get these goods and services, this will put a pressure on prices to go up, and there will be inflation in the economy. Now, this means inflation acts like a tax. Okay, uh, your purchasing power has decreased. Just like when you are paying a tax, your purchasing power has decreased. So same is when your prices are increasing. Okay, if there is inflation in the economy, then it means your purchasing power is decreasing. So this is called inflation tax. Okay, so printing money to raise revenue causes inflation, and inflation is like a tax on people who hold money. Uh, in those economy which are not documented, so the government use this option, okay, inflation tax, because when the revenue cannot be raised through taxes, then the next option is to print money, and this would be considered as inflation tax. Then inflation and the interest rate. Okay, so we have nominal interest rate. Suppose this is I, and this is not adjusted for inflation. Okay, and the real interest rate is adjusted for inflation, and the real interest rate equals nominal interest rate minus inflation rate, which is the expected inflation rate. And this is the Fischer equation, that the nominal interest rate equals real interest rate plus inflation rate. Okay, from here we got this, because the real interest rate equals nominal interest rate minus inflation. So if you want to get nominal interest rate, so you will take this inflation rate the left hand side. So then we have here, it will become plus. So nominal interest rate equals real interest rate plus inflation rate. Now, if you look at, if the nominal interest rate is 10% and inflation rate is 8%, so it means the real interest rate is 2%. Okay, and we basically look to the real interest rate. So if I'm putting my money in the bank, and suppose I put 100,000 in the bank, and after 1 month, 1 year, I'm getting 10% nominal interest rate. So this means after 1 year, I will get 110,000 rupees. But suppose inflation rate is 8%. So the same good which was available at 100 rupees, now it will become 108 rupees. Or 100,000 will be available in 108,000. So my real return on my investment would be only 2,000 rupees, or 2%. Okay, so that's why we look to the real return. Okay, so real interest rate. Now from chapter 3, we know that saving equals investment, and it will determine the real interest rate. So an increase in inflation rate causes an equal increase in nominal interest rate. Okay, so from here, because this real interest rate is determined by saving investment identity. Okay, so if there is change in saving or change in investment, then real interest rate will change. So this means if there is change in inflation rate, then it will change the nominal interest rate. And we see that if the inflation rate is increasing in the economy, so bank, they increase the nominal interest rate. Also government, government increases the rates on saving certificates and deposits, all this. But if the inflation rate is decreasing, you can see that there will be a decrease in the nominal interest rate. And you just saw when the inflation rate was very high last year, then nominal interest rate was also high. When government decreases the interest rate, when there was decrease in inflation rate, and also you will decrease the nominal interest rate. So again, there is one for one relationship between the interest rate, nominal interest rate, and inflation rate in the economy. Okay, and this is called the Fischer effect. If we look at the real world data, again, we have inflation rate here and nominal interest rate here. So if the inflation rate is high, we can see that nominal interest rate is also high. This is Zimbabwe, Romania, Bulgaria. Now here, if in Switzerland, you can see that inflation rate is low, so nominal interest rate is also low. In some countries, inflation rate is almost zero, like Japan. So nominal interest rate is also zero. You will not get any interest rate on your deposits. Okay, on some deposit in Japan, if you will not get any interest rate. Now this is the exercise that you have to do. Okay, suppose V is constant, M is growing at 5% per year, Y is growing 2% per year, and real interest rate is 4%. Okay, so you have to solve for nominal interest rate. Okay, and for A, okay, and for B, if the central bank, Fed, no? Federal Reserve, this is US central bank, if this increases the money growth rate by 2 percentage point per year, then what would be the change in the nominal interest rate? And suppose the growth rate of output falls to 1% per year, then what will happen to inflation rate? And then what must the central bank do if it wishes to keep inflation rate constant? Okay, just try to solve it.